Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this Auto Supply Chain 2022 conference with the theme Environment Friendly Agile Supply Chain. This session is on EV adoption. My pleasure to request Mr. Rahul Mishra, partner Kearney, to chair this session. Mr. Rahul Mishra has worked in various industries in consulting and has industry experience in automotive, including electric mobility, along with energy, power, metals and mining, cement, infrastructure, and industrials. He is an alumni of Indian School of Business and IIT Mumbai. Over to Mr. Rahul Mishra. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhanumati, and good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to all my fellow panelists and all the participants who joined this on call and watching this as part of the live stream. Thank you for the introduction, and always great honor and privilege to be here as part of this discussion. Interestingly, the discussion today also is focused at the confluence of two separate topics. One, which is around supply chain, which is something within the automotive industry that we've been discussing quite vehemently and quite passionately over the last 2 years. And the other being in the area of electric mobility and electric vehicles, which in itself is a topic that I follow quite passionately. Great to see some familiar faces on the call and on the panel. So let's get this started. I think the way we'll do this is just wanted to we have about the next 90 minutes or so. Just wanted to set the context in terms of where we are, why is thinking about the supply chain challenges and whether we'll be able to keep up with the pace in this market, specifically when it comes to electric vehicles, is important, right? Multiple triggers to that and multiple challenges which both large established players as well as new entrants in the market are facing, and just wanted to place some of those on the table and then use that as a background or as a context to kind of start the conversation and the discussion that we have. Give me a minute, I'll just project my screen and let me know once you're able to see this. Is this visible to you all?
Yes, I can see that.
All right. So I think just to set the context, I think the primary driver in this entire thing has been the growth that we are anticipating. As a consultant, and all of us in the market have been crystal ball gazing a bit in terms of what the EV penetration would be. But needless to say that this is the market which has been seeing significant growth, and there will clearly be pockets of segments across two-wheelers, three-wheelers, buses, etc., which are likely to see a significant amount of penetration, driven by both the fact that there are strong factors both on the demand side, which is softening people's view on kind of moving and thinking about electric vehicles. At the same time, a big amount of push both from the industry, from subsidies, policy side of it to drive this. And without belaboring this, but I think this is a phenomena. The kind of penetration that we are seeing is similar to what the global economies are seeing, and as a result, the overall component market and the EV components space is going to play a significant role in terms of disrupting the overall auto component market. If you see the estimates in terms of what the size could potentially be across 2020 to 2025, there are some parts of this overall stack which you'll see will witness significant amount of growth. Some are largely expected to stay stagnant, which are agnostic to the powertrain type, and some would see a decline. Now, this kind of change in mix has implication both in terms of what is procured, what is needed, where it is bought from, what's the service levels, what the resilience of the overall thing. In India itself, if you see the overall from a component side of it, and there's a similar view that one could talk about on the vehicle side and the spare part side, where supply chain and outbound logistics comes into picture. But a lot of conversations that we are having with EV players right now over the last 4 to 6 months has been around looking at their own supply chain readiness, their own resilience plan, their readiness of their supply chain to cater to their aspirations of 2025, 2026, and all the kind of growth numbers that they are looking at. And amongst these, batteries, power electronics, motors, equipment around charging station, all of this will continue to have a significant share. And with time and with increasing volume, there's also a need to explore how much of this could be sourced locally. Now, that means that the supply bases change. We are not looking at a static network or a static supply chain for the business over the next 4 to 5 years. And therefore, with the size and scale increasing and the complexity increasing and the footprint of the supply chain networks and the asks evolving, are we going to be ready and be able to operate at a level at which industry and customers expect us to operate is the key question. What has added to the problem is the fact that there have been a number of events globally which have added to the overall complexity, whether it is limitations in terms of constraints, container shortages, one-off events like the canal blockage that happened, COVID. We know during the pandemic there were situations where people were looking at shifting their share of business and reducing the dependence and on the Eastern and the Chinese markets, given the geopolitical situations as well, and a number of other such scenarios which have really forced people and kind of nudged people to think about will they be able to, will their supply chains be ready to kind of handle the uncertainty and the flexibility that's needed. Some of these disruptions in key category areas, if we talk about whether it's on batteries, electronics, semiconductors, some of these may be short term. There's a view if we look at the inventory trend and all of that, and for those organizations who are looking at this, you can pretty much look at the inventory levels, the kind of order commitments that large players have, and take a stab at how long this uncertainty on the semiconductors would be, which may not really be very long, but the challenges around batteries, for example, or some of the other components would continue to be there. I'll not drain these slides, but I think the question is that some of the big ticket items from a cost and from a focus priority area will continue to attract a lot of attention over here. I think in India, if you're looking at some of these things in terms of the traditional dependence on East Asian countries, the need for the plan for some of the Indian players to set up and scale up large capacity, both on batteries as well as on the vehicle side. Many industry players and many of you have already made announcements and made public confirmations of scaling up volume to a sizable scale. And that puts a significant amount of pressure on both your sourcing teams and your supply chain teams to see that is something going to be ready. Will your supply chain be able to scale up? And therefore, I think and just to get the thought started on this, what we have consistently been discussing and we've seen players look at is just to take a very, very close lens view on the overall supply chain and its resilience. And typically we see the overall supply chain resilience to be assessed across the 4 pillars of you're planning this, you're sourcing it, you're making it, and you're delivering it. And across the 4 pillars of your bucket, everything around how robust and resilient your planning capabilities are, from what's the kind of supply landscape, single supply dependence versus multi-supply dependence, share of business, country of origin, things like that. Are your product platforms in line with the kind of flexibility and agility that you need on supply chains? We have done tear downs of many of the electric two-wheelers that are there in the market, because as a business, we keep doing it from time to time. And you'll be amazed to see the kind of insights that those tear downs throw up in terms of standardization of parts, ability to scale up, ability dependence on the suppliers, and therefore will that product be able to scale up over a period of time or not, given the kind of volume aspirations that those players have made. So therefore, product platform evolution in line with keeping in mind supply chain risks and considerations are important. Inbound, outbound logistics, manufacturing footprint, where you produce, how you produce, where your supplies come from, thinking all of those, and broadly then looking at the broader geographic footprint and managing your working capital, raw material. Some are broadly the 8 areas typically that we urge organizations to look at and measure their overall resilience around supply chain. Increasingly, there's this added complexity right now of trying to manage the ESG commitments and ESG requirements across the business. And for any of the businesses, especially in the EV side, where the value proposition itself is clean and green, there is no way we cannot think about our scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, and specifically the scope 3 emissions where our upstream, downstream, and logistics playing a significant role. Where we are bringing this, how are we transporting this, what's the kind of kilometers that we are running, what's the fleet mix that we are operating with, and are there ways in which we can bring this down continuously? This becomes an added ask for most of the organizations, if not all. I think what therefore becomes important is just evaluating across all the product lines end to end in terms of identifying what are some of my strategic categories, where are my critical vulnerabilities, and where could potential failures exist. Now, clearly, one could say, as we've discussed, that whether it is around batteries, electronics, build-to-print parts, all of these, there will clearly be a demarcation of what is critical for us. Where is there a dependence on one chip manufacturer, one supplier, one country of origin, and therefore we are either being arm twisted. We don't have the right logistics partner to be able to work with this. As products are going out into the market, our parts supply chain, outbound vehicle movement, those service levels and fulfillments are not being able to meet. We don't know what to stock, where to stock, at what level to stock. So all those aspects become important to look at what are some of our critical categories. And then maybe take a calibrated view in terms of what could be some of the innovations that we could do. It could range from all the way from looking at part localization, nearshoring, and I'm sure some of these themes you would have discussed and kind of evaluated and deliberated earlier during the day in some of the earlier sessions. But a lot of these things around just fundamentally looking at the network, looking at the partner. If logistics is not a core capability, do I still continue to operate the way I've seen traditional auto companies operate? Or do I work with some of the new age companies to offload a large part of the responsibility and let them manage the variability and flexibility that's needed? How do we institutionalize and kind of bring in the technology and the digital capability that gives me end-to-end visibility and ability to map the fluctuations and variability that comes as part of the network? So while a lot of companies are trying to adopt some of these themes, I guess there are still challenges which people need to look at. Now, it could be areas in terms of supply development, measuring the performance. How do we measure? What do we measure? All of this. There'll be challenges around we don't have the right investments, or the relationship that we need to maintain with the supplier is not what we would want for multiple reasons. We are too small a supplier over there. The supplier not just caters to auto and EV companies, but it has a larger supply base for other industries, and therefore we are a smaller fish in a bigger pond. How do suppliers and our network providers and logistics service partners operate when there is a change at our end? Does the impact get passed on to everyone equally, or smaller players start getting impacted more versus less? So a bunch of these challenges can continue to remain, and therefore with those kind of issues and a thought starter on some of the challenges and issues that we continue to see, let me just pause and take it off from the presentation mode and introduce my panelists, fellow panelists over here, who bring in not just a very, very rich and diverse experience across their roles and companies that they're operating, but I'm sure have been in the midst of experiencing and answering some of these challenges as they think about scaling up and growing the business and riding the momentum on the as far as electric vehicles are concerned. Our first panelist is Mr. Narayan Krishnamurthy. Narayan, if you're there, I don't see you on the call. If you could switch on the camera, if you're there.
I'm not able to see him. He has not switched on. We can move to.
Okay. Let me just move on. And once Narayan is there, we'll I'll come back to him. Second panelist is Mr. Vineet Bansal. Vineet and I have connected in the past. Vineet has more than 2 decades of experience across a variety of functions ranging from corporate strategy, finance, investment. Brings in a very rich set of experience coming from the core industry and has been leveraging all his past work in terms of nurturing and building a very strong, credible and reputed business at EV Motors. Vineet is the founder and the managing director of EV Motors. He works closely as he builds the organization. Works closely with private equity firms and manages different aspects of the organization. I've had the opportunity to interact with him earlier, and the kind of multifaceted role that Vineet plays as an organization is absolutely credible. Vineet, pleasure to have you here, and looking forward to the discussion. Our third panelist is Mr. Om Dutt Vashisht. Om, are you there on the call?
No, Om is not there due to a medical emergency. We have Jatin Sharma here, Captain Jatin Sharma.
Sure. Yeah, so I'm coming to Jatin. So let me introduce Captain Jatin Sharma. So Captain Jatin Sharma has 2 decades of really solid and rich experience being an Indian Army officer, and then as a corporate executive at Mahindra Logistics and MJ Logistics, and a founder of the firm in the business of people logistics right now. He handles profiles in operations and sales and has managed execution roles and responsibilities as an entrepreneur, and brings in a very rich and holistic perspective towards the growth and maturity of logistics with organizations in India. Captain Jatin, pleasure to have you here, and looking forward to the conversation. Our next panelist is Mr. Amit Borkar, who's a Vice President Operations at A. Raymond Fasteners. Amit is responsible for leading the overall supply chain operations and has been implementing operating systems and enhancing the end-to-end supply chain performance for his organization. To his credit, I'd say he's played a significant role in shaping up this overall supply chain strategy, which has resulted in significant improvements and performance improvement in SLA, specifically in terms of order fulfillment, sales revenues, and driving overall functional expertise. Amit, happy to have you here, and look forward to leveraging your expertise in the discussion today. So with that, let me just open up the. My first question would be, and let me start with you, Amit, on this. Given that we've talked about already the kind of momentum and the growth that we are seeing with EVs and EV volumes in the market, what do you think are really the challenges that one is experiencing or should be ready to experience when it comes to scaling up the EV business? How ready are we, and how's the supply chain scaling up?
Thank you all for a nice introduction. So it's a really pleasure to be on this panel. So thank you, CIA.
Before that, can I just pause you for a minute, Amit? I can see Mr. Narayan Krishnamurthy on the call. So let me just quickly introduce him for the benefit of all our audience and participants.
Yeah,
Narayan, happy to have you here. Folks, Mr. Narayan has more than 2 decades of work experience in the automotive, aerospace, and more recently on the EV sourcing and on the supply chain side. He's served and operated in various profiles and different capacities across reputed organizations like TVS, Tata Motors, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Hero MotoCorp, and Ola. and currently leads is part of the Griefs Technology as in the role of Vice President and Group Procurement Head for the EV vertical. I'm happy to have you here. We're just getting started, and my first question was to Amit.
Thank you, Rahul.
On the overall supply chain. Amit, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Yes, thanks. So I think coming to the challenges, I think challenges are everywhere. And at Air Raymond's, probably we are into fastening solutions and we work with all the OEMs and their tier ones. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
So challenges, what we see as of now, I think with this new mobility concept coming up, and I think it's ramping up quite well in India. I think all the new age people, new age technologies are coming up, and we can see a lot many startups than with our regular established players. The challenges for when like I see is more, I think with the people, it's more of the how we can serve better, because the need is now or yesterday basis. So all these startups, all these new product, everything is needed now. And that's where probably we need to ensure that our supply chains are that resilient enough, that agility, have that right agility to ensure that we meet the new requirements of these new age companies. So like working with the established players and working with the new age companies is a stark difference. Though the people remain same, but the demand, the requirement now, the time, the support systems are completely different. So that I see a big challenge coming up, and that is one. But and also those who have started in business, I think the ramp up is quite high. Okay, and meeting those supply chain needs and those components, it definitely pose a good big challenge for people like us. But to overcome this, what we have adjusted ourselves, that we created a separate arm under new mobility to meet these customer requirements, and we have building our capabilities. We are trying to see that how we can improve our footprints to across pan India, that we support in various regions, at least especially the auto zones what we have in India, that we do. But majorly, largely, Rahul, on the challenge side is on the people. I see how we develop the competency at our end, and even at the customers end, and how quickly we can serve, and what is their need, and what kind of things they can give us in the right sense of information, the right kind of drawings or right kind of application oriented information, so we can give a better solution. So that's how I see today a big challenge coming up for entire new mobility section.
Sure. Thanks, Amit. Narayan, any additional perspectives you would want to add on this with the scale up in the volumes from a supply chain challenge, anything that you've been experiencing?
Yeah, very good afternoon to all. The major supply chain challenge at this point of time, if you see, it's fueled with the lithium cells currently, right? The raw materials are not available, and it is being manufactured either in China or in Korea. So cell is one of the very critical element in terms of availability and the shortfall in terms of the scaling. What we are thinking today, the way in which we are expanding our all verticals in terms of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, as well as four-wheeler to electrification. The availability of cell is going to be a biggest challenge in the upcoming year. So on the supply chain front, one is on cell availability. The second is currently all our vehicles are running based on completely, it is a telematics and IoTs, right? The semiconductor plays a major role. So cell and semiconductor is going to be a biggest challenge in terms of supply chain. So this will prevail till we have our own cell manufacturing in India, which because of PLI scheme, all the people are coming up with their own cell manufacturing. So, but next 2 years to 3 years, we have to struggle for availability of the cells and semiconductors. So this is the challenge which I foresee in terms of supply chain. Of course, a lot of new dimensions, a lot of customers, as Amit told, the customer usage, use patterns, understanding the electric vehicle when compared to ICE engines, the service availability, all those things will be a biggest challenge. The third big one will be the logistics, because this is also this towards the logistics I want to speak. The cell storage, right? nobody is properly managing the cell storage, because if you see top three players, either LG, Samsung, or Panasonic, they're all telling that this store has to be stored at 23 degrees C, right? For a betterment of the cell life as well as the safety parameter. So when we are talking about scaling, we need to equally keep the supply chain understanding the criticality of what they are handling, the material handling, the storage, the ecosystem availability with the cold storage. All those things need to be expanded. Currently, only few companies are following the proper storaging guideline. If you go and see the tier 2 or tier 3 companies who are all making the battery pack today, they don't have a proper storage condition as per the norms. So this will be a biggest challenge in terms of the safety of either the company or it is for the customer. So these are all the challenge we can put as a first step, and we can debate and we can discuss.
Sure. Thank you for that. And in fact, thank you for corroborating some of the points we were discussing earlier in the opening part, where lithium cells, semiconductors, all of those challenges was something that's impacting everyone.
Yeah.
But Vineet, let me come to you. I know as someone who's been instrumental in building an organization very recently and pretty much ground up on this, I'm sure there'll be an additional set of some of these challenges would manifest in different shape and form for you. What's your view? How do these things change in your context?
Yeah, so I mean, from the context, let me kind of first talk about, our focus is more in the, the energy storage, the batteries and chargers for two-wheeler and three-wheeler applications. So I'm going to be speaking from that perspective, in terms of how, we see the challenges in those areas. So when we look at, the kind of product that we are making, we are looking at, ways to localize some of the, components that goes into our products. And the biggest challenge we see is when we work with, newer companies and startups, is in terms of, I would like to say, classify them into three areas. One, investment in R&D, because when you look into localizing and getting into these, these areas, that requires significant investments in R&D, especially in the electronics and some of the things that it does provide an opportunity for new players to enter the space, but requires significant investments in R&D. So how well are they set up to make those investments and bring these kind of products into the market? The second thing, is in terms of the quality. So as you look at new entrants and you look at new, new participants, is how do they, maintain and manage the quality? And as you look at scaling up, how do they manage the quality? So that becomes a very important part from our perspective. And lastly is safety. At the end of the day, when we talk about, energy storage, safety becomes a very important element, and the components that go into the product, has an impact on the end, the safety of the end product. So from my perspective, I would like to kind of, classify those as three, major challenges when we look at sourcing components from, new entrants in this space.
Sure. Yeah, so clearly some of these are top of the mind, but Captain Jatin, let me come to you from someone who's looked at this as from a service provider side, or catering to a number of different players, both in the traditional auto sector sense versus the some of these newer segments around EVs. How do you see this? What are you hearing from your customers, and just in terms of being able to manage and deliver services, what's your view?
Thank you so much, Rahul, at the outset. for getting me on this panel. And I think I'd like to thank CII as well. I hope I'm audible. Great. So interestingly, I mean, any opportunity that comes in, an opportunity of this size brings with it its own challenges. And we've been talking to a few startups. We've been talking to certain organizations that are looking at going the EV way. And we see that, you know, there are certain issues that they face with respect to logistics services. And that is what I will focus on, though the organization that I lead now is focusing on logistics technology. But since, you know, there was a time about 10 to 12 years back when my organization was managing a regional distribution center for a very large Indian, you know, passenger vehicle, PV and commercial vehicle company. And we had very strict, very strict SLAs for, let's say, when the vehicle would be off-road, you know, and how that delivery had to be treated and how the spare parts had to be treated. And we also used to work with their complete network of service stations and service centers. So SLAs had to be maintained, and you know there was enough and more data and experience that those organizations had to be able to build SOPs. So I think the challenges revolve around three aspects. The one that I believe is slightly easier to handle is infrastructure. Thanks to grade A warehouse penetration in India, you know, most of the users have now gotten used to getting better quality warehouses. The specifications are of international standards. I surely understand that, you know, battery storage and certain other items that go into the making of an EV need a controlled environment for storage. But I believe with the kind of growth we are seeing in good quality warehouses, that is something that can be managed. The two larger challenges I see, Rahul, are one is around, I think, the processes, because the operating procedures, the protocols are not set yet. So when you're trying to grow exponentially, but you don't have enough data, enough experience to be able to build, you know, systems and processes, it becomes a bit of a challenge. And when I talk to EV manufacturers and startups, I can get a sense of that. So I think that's one. And the other one, I think, is around people. The tendency or the understanding of a logistics service provider with respect to SLAs will have to change. So and what kind of technology the users are going to be expecting a service provider to be on, because we are looking at, you know, like you said, ESG comes naturally to an EV sector, right? So does technology, because they're not going to they want to be in a low asset light model. They don't want to set up service stations. So the warehouses are expected to play a dual role of not just storage of inventory, but also support in terms of servicing and spare part delivery and aftermarket. So that, you know, that entails adoption of a lot of technology to be able to meet the SLAs of EVs. So I think these three aspects are the big ones that I think need to be resolved before we can have, you know, we can see success in the field.
Thank you, Jatin. So I think that gives us a fair sense across the board, across all our panelists, in terms of how they see some of these challenges, in terms of which parts to how they would operate, in terms of what would it entail in terms of offering top-notch services. But when given this environment right now, and let me come back to you, Vineet, with my next question, which is on the fact that given all that you've been experiencing and what you're seeing with some of the other players as well, what would you look for in a supply chain service provider? How would you really decide who to choose for and who could be a long-term partner?
So, you know, there are two ways I like to kind of look at that. One, in terms of the partners that, you know, for which we need to kind of, from a global perspective, right, where we are kind of sourcing some components which are still not present locally. And the second thing is in terms of how we look at, you know, local suppliers and local manufacturers. So, you know, in terms of, so I like to kind of separate that into two segments. So today, you know, it's a suppliers market, you know. So when we look at internationally, for us, you know, for batteries, you know, cell supply is a huge thing. And as Mr. Narayan had mentioned, you know, that's going to be a biggest challenge. So for us, when we kind of look at energy storage and being a startup, our goal is to see how we can differentiate our the product. So we look at cells, something which is kind of unique and not not which is a generally used by various manufacturers. So when you kind of get into that kind of technology or strategy, then how do you bring your how do you work with your partner to localize those kind of cells in India? So that becomes a big challenge, and that we still continue to work with that. So if we bring in some kind of look at some kind of a proprietary solution, how do we get the cell manufacturing in India? So that's one of from a outside perspective. And then when we look at from a local vendors and local suppliers, as I kind of mentioned, in terms of how they are managing their processes internally from quality, R&D, safety, how we can rely on those components, and also because of the shortage of the electronics that is there, in terms of how well are they set up in terms of sourcing things locally in India for their components and their raw materials. So those things kind of become very important in terms of how we look at partnering with various partners to see what is their supply chain for our partners, and how well are they structured to manage their supply chain, and how it is going to affect the delivery and the timing and cost for us. So I think I would like to look at it from that perspective.
Sure. But Amit, on that note, is there something that is there something additional or different that you see when selecting a new partner? Because there's a traditional business and there's an old school learning that's always been there of selecting the right partner. But then with all this new complexity, one managing between the two portfolios and different tasks, different requirements, do you see that differently?
Yes, I think like that Vinitji what mentioned was right, and I agree on that. And you need to balance that, to be honest. If you being to be a supplier, or if you want to be choosing the right partner, having it on board with us, meeting with the right alignment and the right delivery system matters. And more important, I see, is a biggest collaborative efforts between whether choosing the right partner and meeting our customer needs. So that collaboration among the three parties is highly important in that perspective. And as I said earlier, the challenge is the timing is now for the new age companies. They need it now because they are into that kind of business. Whereas our other established players, they know how to make that business and how to run that product line. So that's the different. But we are quite like choosy and ensuring that we have the right partner, be it on the supplier side or be it on the customer side. And we tend to see that we work in a collaborative manner. That's what we try to.
Sure. Ryan and Jatin, and anything further to add? What you see in your context, Jatin, anything that you hear from your customers?
So basically, the tier one, that is the manufacturer, the suppliers ecosystem, need to be strengthened with the technology, which is really missing at this point of time. EV requires, I told you, one is cell, which is 50% of the cost is going on the cell, and another 20 to 30% which is going on motor, controller, and all the electronics. 80% of the cost, what we are doing today, it's basically not under the control of original equipment manufacturers like us, right? So what's happening in this, everybody wanted to do in-house manufacturing of battery pack, in-house manufacturing of motor and controller, but the major element missing is the technology, which is really missing. And all are experimenting with by doing something, benchmarking and doing that. So really, the tier one need to strengthen their portfolio of the technology and offer it to the startup companies. And coming to the established players like Tata Motors or Hero MotoCorp, the number one, number two, they are all doing in-house with certain supply chain ecosystem. Parallelly, they are doing the vertical of doing the in-house manufacturing. So everybody is on a learning curve at this point of time, and definitely there'll be some point, maybe 2 3 years down the line, the real technology like the magnetless motor, right? SRM motor. Currently, we are using all magnets are imported 100% from China, and we are assembling here. But when you want to deal in China, you need to definitely come with the technology with SRM motor, which is even 3 to 5 years away from now. So nobody is having a design solution now. Even Tesla is doing the invention now. So with all these things, technology is going to play a major role in a couple of years. So it is a wait and watch. And the same thing for the chemistry which is being used for cell. Nobody is clear whether we are going for a uh, uh, NMC cell or it is a LFP moving towards sodium ion. The other side is the solid state. Technology is moving. We are seeing that in a pace what we have not seen in the past. But the investment wise, nobody wanted to do an investment without understanding the technology, right? So this is again chicken and egg. So people, OEMs are afraid of investing on certain technology for manufacturing without having a proper understanding that how the steady state will be in few years. So because of this, always an ambiguity of people are getting information from suppliers and copy pasting. Chinese model are coming up with all the startup companies. With all those things, people are equally confused that what to do, where to invest, and which partner we need to choose. Because suppliers are good for ICE engine, but the same suppliers are new for EV. You can partner with them, but do they have the knowledge? No. So this is an evolving across the globe. All are in the similar platform, I can say. That's where some of the startup companies are doing much better than the established OEM. Maruti is suffering. They are not able to come up with the EV product, but Tata Motors taken a leap and they have taken an Nexon EV, right? So it's equally a risk game for any OEM, but the technology piece is still evolving across the globe. That's my.
Sure. So, Captain Jonathan, let me come to you next. A lot of thrust on technology around digital. While that's important, at times it also ends up creating a big behemoth, which kind of restricts the pace or the nimbleness or the agility that businesses might need. And therefore, my question is that when you look at the ecosystem of service providers, and you've been in the space for quite a while, so some of the new age service providers and the kind of breed of service providers that are there, are they nimble and agile enough to work in an environment which is changing, which is as challenging as it is? Or would they need a fairly well-defined, constant kind of a problem statement to work with, and any kind of volatility or uncertainty throws things in an array?
So Rahul, I think in my experience, what we've seen is, as Mr. Narayanan has pointed out, that there are no clear specifications on, what's going to be the product like and what's the technology as far as the product is concerned. Now that has a big bearing on logistics service providers and warehouse service providers, because what really is happening is that most of the startups, even larger organizations, do not have data around minimum order quantities. They do not have data around what kind of stock levels they want to maintain. While they are working on, let's say because of the demand that we are seeing, they're working on pretty okay projections. But obviously, I mean, it's a volatile market, and technology is changing very quickly. So that can have a bearing on, what amount of inventory they want to hold, what is it that they want to have in the manufacturing plant, what is it that they want to have in the warehouse. And that becomes a challenge, because as a warehouse service provider, if I have to plan their warehousing space, that's one of the first things that we need to look at. And we are not sure, and they're not sure about what kind of quantities they want to store or what kind of infrastructure they want to have at the start. And eventually, how do they want it to grow? It's not possible for me to go to a warehouse service provider and sign up a long-term agreement. So that becomes a serious issue for us. And in addition to that, if we were to, let's say, look at a center of gravity model to be able to say that where is the demand coming from and where is it that they want to set up their supply chain network. Now, those kind of issues, I mean, we don't have data around it because there is no surety of who the supplier is going to be. So all the issues that are being, mentioned by the OEM actually have a big bearing on this link between the tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers and the OEMs, which are the supply chain, warehouse service providers and logistics people. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed. I also firmly believe that that's actually turning out to be an opportunity in a very, in a good way, because, you just spoke about what is it that these people need to do. And I think technology in terms of logistics platforms, in terms of, the kind of softwares that are available will go a long way in ensuring that OEMs are comfortable with their supply chain service providers. And the sole reason for that, I'll tell you, is that startups obviously do not have the capital to be able to start with, let's say, an SAP or a Microsoft Dynamics or an Oracle NetSuite. So they want to put their time and money on focusing on R&D, right? And which is rightfully so. So when you're looking at growth, but you don't really have the capital to, let's say, have a material management system or an ERP system, you're going to be dependent on certain modules. Now, if the warehouse service provider comes in, let's say, and brings in that technology and brings in basic modules, low cost setups for the OEMs to be able to have visibility of their inventory, OEMs to have visibility of what's happening with their suppliers, because look, they don't have, the order size is not certain. The SLAs, I think, are not really decided right now. The TAT is variable. So if you want to get a hold on these things and then be able to build stronger relationships with your suppliers, I think there is a very strong case for OEMs to build I think capabilities as well. Like, I am hearing about so many technologies that Mr. Narayan and Mr. Vineet have spoken of. And it's giving me ideas around the fact that, as a warehouse service provider or as a transportation service provider, we all need to understand, we all need to look at, what kind of infrastructure is required and sort of back it up with technology, bring in our platforms, which the OEMs can leverage, before they get enough clarity to be able to build deeper relationships with suppliers. I think that's a key role that LSPs should be looking at right now.
Sure. But Vineet, as a recipient of these services, do you see this differently, or do you share the same view in terms of this current state of service providers?
Yeah, so I mean, my view is that we are very early in the very early stages of developing this a kind of a supply chain network for some of these electronic components. So to kind of classify whether they are nimble enough right now, I think it's a premature to make any assessment or a judgment at this point of time. However, I think what I would like to say is that several things that the various players can bring into the system to be able to respond faster and be nimble is what Mr. Jatin said, is to bring in those technologies and the systems in place as they kind of scale up their operations to become more responsive. So there are two elements. One is in terms of how to be responsive in terms of technology, and the second thing is how to be responsive in terms of delivery and timing, right? So one is the logistics part, and one is in terms of establishing yourself as a vendor in the industry. So I think those two things require separate thought process. So on the technology, I would kind of mention that what Mr. Narayan mentioned, that 50% of the cost of the vehicle is in the batteries, and right now the OEMs are kind of shying away from investing because don't know which technology is going to be there. So that gives opportunities for startups like us to come and get into the, into this business of energy storage, because traditionally, when we talk about, automobiles, it's always the OEM which, manufactures the powertrain, right? Battery would be classified as one part of the powertrain for this industry. So I think, right now, I think it's more of an opportunity for startups to come and, become a player and set up different systems and processes in place to kind of become nimble. So my view is that I think for us, we are still trying to develop that relationship with the various, vendors to support us to really make an assessment at this point.
Sure. And just on that point, a lot of what we heard is about not having the right level of data to be able to predict, forecast, plan, define the norms and all of that. Does that mean that a lot of the onus of establishing the new set of operating parameters, if I were to put it that way, or defining the agility on the supply chain with the logistics service providers, a lot of that onus resides with the OEMs and with the customers to be able to provide the data, have a significant runway to say, look, this is how and this is where we want to operate. Is that how you read this?
So basically, the logistics service provider, there is no big challenge at this point of time, because ICE means internal combustion engine is more complex supply chain than EV. Okay, if you see the number of parts, the scaling, the volume, small scale company to large scale company, I think it's very well set in India, a good ecosystem available in India. I don't foresee any issue except the safety norms, which I already told you during the initial phase. We need to make sure that the safety norms are well met in terms of how to handle the cell. Apart from this, if down the line, next 2-3 years, if you are coming with cell manufacturing, we need to see that the miners are going to send the chemicals, right? So all these things are going to come as a whether lithium or cobalt, manganese, all these things are going to come as a raw material, right, to us. So I think the ecosystem of doing that type of logistics, I'm not sure, except the steel industry, we need to benchmark certain different industry for managing our logistics service provider to manage from the port to the cell manufacturing location. That is one side on the forward logistics. Semiconductor, of course, nobody is going to put a fab unit in India. It will be an assembly unit initially. Even Foxconn with Vedanta, they are going to assemble it in India. It is not going to be a big deal. When it comes to reverse logistics, the e-waste coming as a cell, right? Cell after 2 years, 3 years, we need to replace from the vehicle. That need to go back to a recycling unit, or it should go back to the miners, right? To extract the minerals from there. So reverse logistics of the EV ecosystem will be a much challenging for all of us. And first of all, we need to have a proper policy in place, how the government is going to come out of the policy of handling and the reverse logistics, the accounting of cell. Is the cell after the EV, is it going for a second life for a energy storage? The accounting tracking of the cell from the customer goes back to where? Example, currently the lead acid battery cell, how they are managing is all the OEMs are having tie-up with the tier 1 companies, and they buy back this the basic cell and they will recycle it. So that's how the lead is not going back to the earth, because lead is very harmful, right? So the same way, if lithium ion comes, it is a very we don't know about the toxic in nature, the larger portion we have not seen how it's going to affect our environment. Apart from this, the safety again, how they are going to handle going back to the miners, how they are going to extract, how the reverse logistics will be, what will be the norms that these things are going back to the recycling unit or a secondary usage like ESS. All those things will be a very big challenge, Rahul. I think from logistics perspective, reverse logistics of all the cell and the battery packs, which is going to come out as out of the after the life, need to be well thought of from the logistics side. That's my point.
Sure, sure. Amit, any other thoughts to add?
Yeah, sure. I think if I just want to take focus on step ahead on upstream side. So right from selecting, designing a component. So how environmental friendly, how logistics friendly we can design such components at the right stage. So this will this will overcome all the challenges we just heard. Like fuel cell, definitely we are highly dependent on only on one kind of supply chain. But there are many, I can see many opportunities in thermal management, on connectivities or connections or some bondings where we can really design localize a component at design level, at India level, which are environmentally friendly, which are logistic friendly, and definitely aid us into the reducing the carbon footprint. So maybe I see a solution right at a design where we can collaborate and take the consideration of the logistics part also, including the reverse logistics. What Mr. Narayan spoke is really important, and that is going to be a challenge going ahead for sure. But I see a step ahead in upstream supply chain where right from the design stage, how we can collaborate with the right partners and have the right design locally made in India and have the right supply chain free of any risk, kind of risk.
Sure, sure. On that thought, I'm just wondering that the way traditional supply chains and logistic markets evolved as consumer, as end users, people would engage with transporters, and then they moved away to service providers, third-party logistics providers, integrated providers, getting a digital platform. And so basically the whole operating model around selecting the supply chain partner and how you want to run it, what kind of efficiencies, SLAs that you want, that kept on changing. And that had an impact on the kind of asks that you placed when you went out to the market to select a supply chain partner or a logistics partner over there. With all these things that we are discussing in the context of EVs, do you see these asks further evolve? Let's say, I mean, if I were to put it very simply, the supply chain or the logistics RFP that you released 3 years back versus what you would release now for the next 4 or 5 years, would that be very different in terms of what you want the partner to deliver, or would that largely be same? And just hope that the partner would evolve as the business evolves. Amit, you would start, and then actually we can go across the panel.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So for us, so from my standpoint, industry which we work, I don't see a very stark difference till the time we really evolve into more of a localization and more into solutioning business. So for us, I think it will not be much different in coming 5 years. So whatever is the established supply chain, right, for our current customers or the IC engines parts, it will remain till the time we really grow high volumes and there is some specific need how we take care from the carbon footprint or the ESG requirement. I think that will be a game changer for the logistics part also. So that's what I see from my business standpoint.
Sure. And Jatin, from an industry point of view, are you seeing a significant shift in what customers are now demanding?
I think, Rahul, there is lack of clarity. Mostly RFQs are on similar lines as far as, conventional companies would float. But like I said before, the only differences right now that we see are in terms of, the size of orders, the throughputs they want us to manage. The SLAs are also very dynamic. That's something that we've observed because more often than not, the kind of RFQs we are getting, we sense, that there is still time for the industry to mature. I think, obviously, now that we've had a very good setup around conventional ICE engines and how we support them. I think the difference is going to lie, Rahul, in aftermarket. And that's something, so when we are looking at the FG, the finished good itself taking the kind of time it is, I think the aftermarket is going to be a very big space, which will have a lot of questions to be answered. And that's also a space where logistics service providers will be expected to play a big role. So while I'm not seeing a lot of it in the RFQs, but I sort of foresee that happening. Within the aftermarket, I would not just like to talk about, availability of spare parts at the typical channel, aftermarket channel. I think that's also going to see a change. This is what I think, and the kind of SLAs that the customers are going to expect in with respect to servicing, with respect to breakdowns and offroading of the vehicle. There will be a very high SLA expectation on logistics service providers. What comes to my mind here is also a great opportunity for LSPs, 3PLs to be able to really understand how this is going to work, because the typical conventional, that near your home auto market is not going to, give you the right maintenance that you're looking for. So you're going to depend on the OEM, and the OEM trying to be asset light is not going to set up an extensive service network, leave aside the, Tata Motors, Ashok Leyland, and, the big ones, which already, they just need to leverage what they already have. But logistics service providers will have to play a very, very active role in terms of aftermarket sales support. And as Mr. Narayanan has pointed out, there's going to be a big role for us to play when we are talking about, say, the returns, right? Reverse logistics aspect. So I look at it in both ways. I think, firstly, to ensure that the spare parts are available, to ensure that the vehicles are up and running. I think besides the OEM, the logistics service provider has a great opportunity. I mean, just try to visualize, we have a team of, let's say, pickers and packers as we usually have. But let's say we are sending one technician along with the vehicle, which is taking the spare part, and that technician is trained by the OEM to do some kind of repair work, limited amount of repair work right at the home, right at the doorstep. I mean, I'm just thinking out aloud. Maybe these are the kind of models that we'll have to eventually get to when we look at, having a very, very high penetration of EVs. So that's where I think both sides of the aftermarket and the reverse logistics, trained people, I think, and very agile and very responsive, I think, because typically, there is a delay, as you would see that in ICE engines, we order a part, but there are times we are told that it's going to take a certain amount of time. Now, I don't know if we get to a level where people are totally depending on one EV per family, and that's the only car they're using, then, the kind of support and SLA we'll have to maintain. So I think, it's a challenge and a great opportunity for LSPs.
Yeah. And that's a nice cue. And hold on to that thought. I'll come back to you on that, because while some of these additional asks get placed, it also has an implication of the sort of capabilities that the logistics or the supply chain industry and the players need to bring, and what those capabilities are. But let me go to Vineet and Narayanan and just get their views on, as customers, is there a different or a significantly evolving ask? And then we should talk about, therefore, for those asks, what are the kind of capabilities that need to be brought to bear? Vineet.
Yeah. So, I was just kind of listening to what Jatin was mentioning. So it kind of, what an important thought in my mind is, we are also, one of the things that we are providing is, last mile delivery services using electric vehicles for all the online ordering, right? And when it comes to servicing, one of the biggest bottlenecks or the challenges that we have right now is servicing, right? Because our customers are wanting, uptime, high uptime. So how are we going to manage that uptime, and how are we going to have the technicians who are trained and certified to be able to work on, on electric vehicles? So that is from the service industry perspective. I mean, I know we've been talking a lot on the manufacturing side, but on the service side, that is a huge skill set that is required in the industry in terms of how to train these technicians to be able to service electric vehicles, and that is kind of resulting in new business models and new startups that are coming up, where they are kind of creating a network or an aggregation of technicians and training them to kind of with the skill sets required to service service electric vehicles which are being used in last mile delivery. So I think that's a different thought in terms of from the service side of the industry. So that is kind of evolving. So I think listening to Jatin, that kind of treat something else, not keeping my manufacturing hat, but on the services side.
Sure.
So I will add on, Rahul.
Yeah.
I think a very valid point from both Vinith and Jatin, right? On the spare parts and the customer turnaround time to service and hand over the vehicles, right? So the number of players are increasing on EV space because of the less complex in assembly and giving to the customer, right? Especially on 2 and 3 wheeler, you can see a lot of new players. You can see in 3 wheeler, you can see Euler Motor came, right? Omega Seiki came. They're all something like they quickly they turn around and become a OEM, right? Voila for my previous assignment is a service company. It's a aggregator. So we entered very quickly and we became a very big OEM and competing with TVS, Hero, and Bajaj. So during this execution, what I have seen is dealer networks are not going to be future model, right? So though dealers are there, the dealer model will slowly get reduced, not immediately, but the mindset of Indian customers are with ICE mindset, and that's the reason that even none of us are able to digest that direct to customer is not possible. But in EV space, it is possible. It is going to be. So when we are going to do that, that lot of spare parts, the number of models are going to be heavy from various automobile players coming in. How are we going to manage the overall logistics of all the different varieties of vehicle running in the road with a different configuration? So that time, definitely the support needed from all the OEM will be how agile the system will be, how fast we can keep the storage space ready to keep the material so that it will go there directly within 24 hours or maybe within few hours. We don't know at this point of time. There is no SLA defined for the end customer. End customers are struggling. If there is a problem on EV, they are waiting for even weeks or 10 days. So definitely the push is going to come that all the new entrants who is not having a dealership model require a pan-India level space, storage area to keep and serve. So for that, a lot of analytics are needed. How many vehicles are running in each segment, which area, what is the pattern of usage and consumption pattern of the spare parts. So those things will be a learning. Maybe that time we need a logistics provider support to work collaboratively to fix the supply chain model, how fast we can turn around and hand over the spare parts to the customer for service reasons. So that's my point.
I'm sorry, I want to just interject here, Mr. Narayan. Listening to you, it brought a very important thought in my mind, and I'm going to make a prediction here that when you look at two-wheeler industry, I think this whole industry is going to change in terms of how people buy and and sell two-wheelers. I think today you've already seen Flipkart selling two-wheelers for some of the OEMs, and I think going into the future, a lot of these two-wheelers are going to be sold online, and it's the servicing in terms of how servicing through technician is managed at the residence or the location of where the vehicle is. I think that's where this industry is going to evolve, and the whole concept of today you have more than 200 OEMs in two-wheelers. So how are they going to set up this dealership network? I don't think so. They're going to have some in state, but not multiple dealers, but maybe some touch points. But primarily, it's all going to be driven by by the online ordering and how over the next 10 years, how these vehicles are serviced through through a technician network. So, I mean, I think, that's going to be a major shift in the two-wheeler industry.
Rahul, addition to this point, I think the automobile mindset has to be changed to white goods. Okay, so how the supply chain ecosystem of the refrigerator or a AC has been serviced, or the supply chain has been established, that's going to come in automobile. So we also equally request the support from CII that the logistics arrangement of white good has to be copy pasted for automobile. So that is the point which I feel that is the equivalent benchmark for the upcoming industry.
Sure. No, clearly there are learnings and templates and lessons that one could pick up from other industries as well, given that they would have gone through a similar journey. But interestingly, the point around the dealership and the channel, we'd recently done a fairly comprehensive exercise on looking at the go-to-market for EV companies, basically companies who are going from a prototype to creating a P&L scale, credible P&L scale business, and therefore what do they need to do? And some of these questions we looked at, and the path to set up the channel and cater to customers even after sales could be slightly different for large OEMs versus new age companies, depending upon the speed, the kind of money and the asset that they want to invest. And therefore the whole supply chain also needs to be geared around that kind of asset light or asset heavy model, depending upon what archetype or what route you end up taking. But quickly, in the interest of time, I think I also see there's some questions coming up in the chat box. So a couple of questions, we can take the panel discussion to about another 10 minutes till about 3:20 and reserve about 10 minutes to address the questions. I hope all the panelists can see the questions, so feel free to pick up when we get into the Q&A. Feel free to pick up the question and respond as you feel. But just on a couple of questions to close, to wrap up the panel discussion, I think, Jatin, we are discussing about the capability ask on this with all these different dynamics playing out over here. So any specific or significant change in capabilities, the new capabilities that you think will need to be built?
So, Rahul, I think as far as capabilities are concerned, we've spoken about obviously infrastructure, which needs to sort of pick up pace and match the requirements of the industry. People, I think, yes, people have the experience of ICE engines, and but I'd just like to put into perspective. Let's say during my time with Mahindra Logistics, we were running a JIT environment for Volkswagen, right? So the kind of maturity that was there in that ecosystem to be able to maintain, very low levels of inventory and to be able to ensure that there was no line loss, that takes a lot of time, right? That takes a lot of time. So I think as far as capability is concerned, LSPs will need to sort of do some handholding, do some collaboration, not run after data because that's not available. So some risk taking will have to be done. And I think, I always look at that as an opportunity. And, if we are able to take certain risks together with OEMs, I think we'll be able to deliver, good result for the industry. I think within that aspect of collaboration, I would like to talk about technology as far as, logistics platforms are concerned. And this is something very close to my heart. And that's typically the army way of doing things right at the start. That you look at patterns and start building them into SOPs. So I think capable logistics organizations which do not just look at EV as additional business coming their way, but look at it as a sector which is going to create a lot of opportunities, a lot of growth for them, and they will have a role to play in establishing protocols and standard operating procedures. I think organizations that can look at the EV industry like that and not just run after, benchmark profits out of, servicing their logistics requirement is going to make a huge difference. And I think as far as roles and responsibilities are concerned, if we are looking at a greater role to play in supporting the EV sector, whether it is in terms of managing their procurement, or in terms of supplier management, something like vendor managed inventory becomes very, very relevant now. Those kind of things, those kind of initiatives, and those kind of technology, if the logistics service provider can provide and build their own capabilities while supporting the OEM, I think that's going to go a long way. I think also one small thing, Rahul, here is that while whenever I look at conventional ICE companies and the way they're managing their supply chains, they have a lot of control over their suppliers. I think while I've spoken a lot about what we can do for OEMs, there is a great opportunity for LSPs actually to engage with suppliers, because look, in the absence of fixed quantities, in the absence of very dynamic technologies, the suppliers are also finding it tough, right? Can't put the blame on them. But there, if the logistics service providers can play a role in, let's say, inventory management, giving visibility of their own warehouses, also looking at overseas incoming supply material, those kind of things will also ensure that suppliers also grow. So tier 1 maybe will not face such issues, but tier 2, tier 3, I think that's something that we need to copy and learn from ICE. Like Maruti setting up their own vendor ecosystem within a periphery of, let's say, 20-30 kilometers, stuff like that. Obviously there's time for that to happen, but I think we need to lay the seeds of that right now. So those things, the capabilities, LSPs will have to take very, very seriously.
Sure. And so just in the interest of time, I would have wanted to ask a few more questions, but let me pretty much jump to my last question and across the panel. Outside of this group of people, the shippers, consigners, the logistics service providers, all of us who are here, in terms of managing and getting the supply chain ready, who could be the other people who could play a role in providing some constructive, active intervention, right? And specifically around the policy side of it, is there something that we need from a policy intervention to fast track, speed up things? Where it is right now, who needs to act on this? Any thoughts on that? And we can go across the panel before we start taking the Q&A. Vineet, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I will give my thoughts. So, I mean, from our side, the cell manufacturing, and also from an OEM perspective, cell manufacturing is a very, very important element for EV. So from a policy perspective, I know very recently the government had issued a PLI scheme for setting up cell plants, and I think some 4 odd OEMs were selected. So, but going forward, I think we are very in the early stages of technology adoption, and I'm sure there are going to be more changes in terms of cell technology that's going to come to to further advance this industry. So how does the government implement additional policies to go beyond what they've already done in terms of the PLI scheme, right? I think to me that's an important aspect as the industry matures and as the technology matures. I would say more technology rather than industry to see how you provide such additional incentives from a policy perspective. So that's one element. Second thing is I would personally say in terms of a lot of technology implementation, there has been a big push to localize components in India. Absolutely important that we need to localize, but at the same time, the government policies have a way in terms of how the customs duty is structured and how how the technology development in India locally and how the customs duty is structured to manage that that localization. Because my personal view is India was too fast from a localization perspective, and we had too many there were a lot of safety incidents that took place. So in terms of yes, we need to localize. Yes, we need to localize faster. But I think the right policies need to be put in place so that the appropriate technology is kind of also matured within the local framework. So So, I mean, I think those are the two things from an energy storage perspective, one on the cells, and then also in terms of how do we implement some, duty structure on these so that, safe technology is there within the country and managed efficiently.
Sorry, Amit,
Yeah.
any thoughts, Amit?
Yes, I think, I think for us, government is the key player in making policy. But as Vinit said, participation of the private players, that is one. But one important thing, what I see here as a tier one or a manufacturer is on the standardization. So making the right standards, making the right validation of those components, standards, for example, a charging gun or chargers for the two-wheelers, where we see wide variety. So we bring more standardization and promote more localization with local R&D, and that should get promoted. So like many people like us, we have a lot of ideas, components to share, so that there can be a good motivation to promote the EV mobility in India. So I look at private players participating along with the government agencies to bring out these policy changes.
Sure. Nayan, anything to add? And then Jatin.
Absolutely right. I think currently the EV industry is running based on the FAME subsidy, and upcoming is going to be a PLI. So these two schemes, good initiative by the government, but fundamentally this is not applicable for all the OEMs, right? If you want to generate new companies are coming up, startup companies are coming up, so they are not involved on the PLI. Either PLI scheme, government has not shortlisted or it is not been, they have not applied for, right? So again, the industry is going to shrink from maybe out of 50-60 players, it may go to a level of top 10 players. So government support is needed. If the new companies are coming, they need to either they need to have a better benefit in terms of custom duty if they are not having a muscle power to invest, or uh, uh, then the automatic consolidation will happen like telecom industry at certain point of time. So that's how it is. Government support is needed, of course, for the and again the charging gun. Currently, the government is standardizing the gun so that anywhere you can go and charge. Some question came on infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is
Yeah.
lacking because of what? It's because of the gun is not standardized. Each and every company is running their own connectors. So now government is coming with a standard connector. You can charge anywhere and it will be like a laptop. So the technology is evolving, and government also is coming with good schemes like charger gun standardization. Only thing, the middle scale companies on a small scale company, how they are going to come up with this type of not involved in the PLI scheme, not involved in the FAME subsidy. So this is going to be a really tough element for upcoming companies.
Sure. Jatin, any closing thoughts on this one? And then
Couple of things, Rahul, very quickly. I think I would want to use this platform to request the OEMs sort of to to have logistics service providers as a part of the DPR or whatever they submit for the PLI schemes, because look, eventually that's going to be very, very critical, right? I'm not sure if it's already allowed, but if we were able to if we were able to build logistics parks, vendor parks right alongside our OEM manufacturers, and I'm not saying the capital, but I'm saying that whatever incentives can be made available should be passed on to logistics service providers as well. And then I can assure you that we'll be happy to invest and build on our own, right? As long as we know that we have long contracts and it becomes a part of this. Also, another thing that comes to my mind is that, like we spoke of aftermarket and service. So let's say somebody's sort of putting around a team, and they're training those people. So there are multiple things that can be done in terms of, one is that the Logistics Skill Council can also look at building a curriculum for training such technicians, right? That's a low hanging fruit that comes to my mind, I think. And as you know that LSPs and warehouse service providers, low margin industry. So whatever support we can get in terms of we know that if it's a captive service that we are doing to an OEM, that whatever kind of margin support we can get from the government, I think that will be very helpful. That's what is on top of my mind.
Sure, thanks for that. And we've got about 5-10 minutes now, and about 3 or 4 questions that I see in the chat box. If you've had the opportunity to go through it, feel free to take a stab at it. One of them is around, given the price premium that exists right now, how are manufacturers looking at this and addressing this pain point? There's something around safety, there's something around the cost aspect and the buying criteria, and then on the charging infrastructure. Feel free to take the lead and respond.
I'll talk about the charging infra and kind of give a little bit my views on charging infra. So typically a lot of the OEMs say that, look, infrastructure is not part of our responsibility. It's the responsibility of an infrastructure player. So I like to give an analogy of the telecom industry, right? So, if you look at it initially, one of the ways the competitive edge that the telecom industry was in terms of setting up the telecom towers themselves. So a lot of the infrastructure was set up by the telecom industry, and then later on, they kind of divested that business. And when you look at the major player, which kind of look at the EV, the EV industry, how it evolved. Tesla is a big brand name. So what is the USP? They are managing their own charging network. So in my view, I think the OEM has a big role to play. It's not necessarily that they have to own the network themselves, but I think in terms of how the infrastructure is created at the right place to meet their customer needs and requirements. And I think that's one thing that is kind of missing in this, in terms of the role that the OEMs are playing to create this infrastructure. So because if you are trying to put these infrastructure sporadically, obviously you don't have the right infrastructure at the right place to the right customer. So how do you make that happen? How do you get the standard connectors there? So to answer the question, the lack of charging infrastructure, I think until and unless there is a very proactive role that the OEM is playing, we'll continue to have this. And another industry I want to talk about is when we talk about the aftermarket industry, in terms of any, let's say, tire. So the turnover, in terms of the tire industry is so huge, because how do you get the right complexity at the right place at the right, for the right customer at the right time is a big challenge. So when you look at charging infra, it's only going to multiply. So in my view, to be able to address this issue, to make sure that the charging infrastructure is available, I think there needs to be a coordinated and partnership approach between the OEMs and the infrastructure player to really bring about this, this gap which is out there. So, that's how I would like to kind of answer or respond to that question.
Thank you, Vineet. Anyone else on the other 3 questions on manufacturing, safety, cost and maintenance cost, resale value?
I will talk about the cost. It's a very varied question. 20 to 30% of the premium compared to the ICE engines. Yes, but the TCO the customer has to look at the total cost, fuel price versus the electricity cost. So I think if they compare differently, there's an advantage over a period of time, maybe 1.5 years when you get the money back. Safety, yes, I agree. There is a real challenge. Everybody is working now. The smart DMS is becoming a mandate as per AAS 156 requirement mandated by the government. December 1st onwards, the phase 1 of AAS 156 is going to get implemented, and 1st of April onwards, the second phase will be implemented. So, a lot of checks has been added in terms of battery management system to trigger that the batteries are not getting exploded. So the initiatives are in policy now, and it has to be mandated. It has to be 100% implemented from 1st of April. So safety, I think it will be a matter of time on technology evolution, but it will be solved. But price wise, it is really scaling is going to help, right? It's not something like assorted 200 different companies are producing EVs and scale is not coming, and it's like a Chinese market. Each province will have different vehicles. It's not going to help. So scaling is going to help a lot. For coming to the scaling to that level, standardization, as Amit told, right? Standardization is going to help. So government has to mandate certain things like swapping system people are talking about. I think swapping battery is going to come in a big way. Maybe after 1 year, 2 years, it is going to come, right? So Gogoro is working with Hero Motocorp. Reliance is coming with their own solutions. So Exide is coming with their own solution. People are coming with their own swapping battery, which will be battery as a service. With this condition, battery will be owned by the OEMs. So the service cost only will be charged to the customer. That point of time, like in Taiwan and Gogoro, is using this model very successfully. So India will have an edge for all the metro cities where the discipline is in place. I think battery swapping solution will be a major advantage when it comes to control the cost. That's right.
Thank you, Ryan. And on that note, just conscious of time, I'd like to wrap up the panel discussion. But really, Amit, Jatin, Nayan, and Vineet, absolute pleasure to be in this discussion with you. Very, very enriching and insightful discussion. And I'm sure all the people who tuned in and were attending this found a lot of relevant anecdotes, a lot of resonance to the situations and the businesses that they're handling. So thank you very much for your time and for sharing the thoughts. It's been a pleasure interacting with you. And Dr. Bhanumati, thank you very much for having all of us over here. Again, it's been a privilege to be with such an esteemed set of panelists over here. Over to you, Dr. Bhanumati.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then we'll have a short break and then resume back at 3:45 with the ESG session. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah.